Juneteenth. What is it?
Right, exactly. So let me just confirm that this is an important day of work. It's not supposed to be a day of just relaxation, because in many ways, Juneteenth is declared a certain kind of freedom day. So let's give the background. The general story is that, in the state of Texas, African Americans allegedly were unaware that the Civil War was over, and that Lincoln had issued the Emancipation Proclamation in 1863. This is not exactly true, by the way, but this is a part of the myth. And so basically on June 19th, 1865, after the Union forces had occupied Galveston, Texas, invaded and basically declared the war over, defeating the Confederacy there in the state of Texas, that's when Major General Granger read this proclamation that that slavery was over. That, again, I say this a myth because Galveston was one of the major international port cities, had a significant working class, including a European working class, very much aware of what was happening around the globe. So it's not that people didn't know. It was that the Union forces weren't able to occupy Texas until that time. To go back to what it really represents, yes, it does represent in many ways what Black Texans think of as the moment of emancipation. But what it was initially called was Jubilee Day. It wasn't called Juneteenth. And it was a reference to Leviticus chapter 25 of the Bible, which promised, in terms of Jubilee, it promised restitution of the land, that is, that the land shall revert to the original owner. It promises cancellation of all debts. It promised in Jubilee the freeing of all slaves and bondservants, right? So the presumption is that this biblical moment is a moment when all slaves are freed. And it's an expression of divine sovereignty. That is, that the true owners of the land is God's land, right? So these celebrations were deeply religious but deeply political. They held parades, picnics, performances, and these political gatherings were moments to talk about the right to vote for Black people, the right to land, the right to some kind of reparations, the need to create political institutions for leadership, and that's what Juneteenth came to represent. And it was the promise of Reconstruction, which we know was overthrown and collapsed under the weight of Jim Crow. And in the 1930s, the Juneteenth celebrations came back, with a force. And it was tied to working class movements, in fact, in the 30s. As Black people migrated out from Texas to places like California and throughout the Midwest and West Coast, they brought Juneteenth with them. Juneteenth is maybe a federal holiday, but it's not a new holiday for Black communities around the country, especially on the West Coast. It's not an accident. Like the Poor People's Campaign in '68 held a Juneteenth solidarity rally in Washington, D.C., for the Poor People's Campaign. The Black Radical Congress, which I attended in 1998, we held the founding meeting on Juneteenth. So Juneteenth represents, a day of struggle, a day of resistance, a recognition that the freedoms promised in the 13th Amendment, freedoms promised in the so-called Emancipation Proclamation were just unfulfilled and was just a promise of liberation, not real freedom.
That and I don't think I was aware, and I think we've probably done now, this is the 4th or 5th year in a row that we've had someone on to talk about Juneteenth. I don't know that I knew that it was called Jubilee, because I ran into this situation with my kid, actually, my 9-year-old explaining Juneteenth as just sort of, I guess, the straightforward. This is when in Texas they were the last people to hear that the chattel slaves were freed, and it was his reaction of like, yeah, that was a good thing, and now that's over. Where it sort of like feels like, well, actually, nah, I mean, it's a little more complicated than that. And it did occur to me, and I don't want to be, I mean, this is maybe a little bit cynical, but this is when I contemplate our holidays, like Independence Day. Well, that was a one-time event, and it fundamentally shifted the dynamic of, what America was. But like the Memorial Days, we don't really spend, I think, the time that we should contemplating these things. But at least there's an opportunity to do that. On some level, like celebrating the end of chattel slavery sort of feels like it sort of like tries to put things in a box and sort of, I don't know, say, well, we finished that and that's that.
Right. Yeah, that's exactly what it does. It puts it in a box as if somehow it's past, but it does something else too, and that is that the narrative, and even coming from decent liberals and some leftists, the narrative is skewed because it does two things that are really problematic. One, it presents the Emancipation Proclamation as the thing that ended slavery, when we know that it was just a wartime document, basically, that did not apply to 450,000 enslaved people in Delaware, Kentucky, Maryland, Missouri, in Tennessee. It didn't apply to places that were loyal to the Union. And not only that, but it only applied to the Confederate states. And unless the Union Army was there to emancipate people, they were still enslaved. So the fact of the matter is that enslaved people freed themselves. When Union troops started to enter into Confederate territory and win battles, Black people flocked to Union lines because they knew they could get protection there. They freed themselves. They undermined the Confederacy. That's a story we don't tell. Then what ends up happening is that the Emancipation Proclamation becomes a great document. The 13th Amendment just drops out, altogether. And so that's part of the story. The other part of the story is, when we talk about the history of Texas, Texas is tricky. Texas is the only state that started out as part of Mexico, then became an independent republic for the purposes of keeping slaves when Mexico had abolished slavery in 1827, and then was annexed, but was annexed and became a state as a result of war, when the U.S. waged war with Mexico and took Texas, California, Nevada, New Mexico, and all those other places, right? So this is the result, that Texas was one of these states designed to be a safe haven for slavery. So during the Civil War, after the Emancipation Proclamation was issued and some Confederate states were losing, what did the slaveholders do? They flocked to Texas. They took their enslaved people and crossed 180,000 enslaved people were brought into Texas. And you don't think that those people who knew and passed on information about the Emancipation Proclamation didn't know that this thing had been issued? Of course they did. This is why they knew they were leaving. And so that's the moment where a number of those who could escape, Black people could escape, they fled south to Mexico. You couldn't flee north. There was no place to go. And so by the time Union troops showed up to retake Galveston, because by the way, I should mention that Galveston was occupied by Union forces in 1862 for several months until January 1st, 1863, the day the Emancipation Proclamation was supposed to be implemented. They were defeated by the Confederacy. So this myth of like people not knowing is dangerous, and it also takes away the agency from enslaved people who were the forces that destroyed the Confederacy in the first place.